that means we all have some work to do. Who is leading matters. We need to push on all of the pressure points. And I don't think that any one strategy is the answer. It's not just changing law or policy or reentry or access to education. It's all of that. And it's being bold enough to envision something totally outside that scope of what already exists.
Who are your musical people that you aspire to play like?
Definitely my guitar teacher. He's really awesome and he lets me just not do whatever I want, but he's totally open to whatever songs I want to play and is just always open to new ideas.
That is amazing.
jams. And I'm so thankful for this space. It's like blowing my mind a little bit, so I think I'm in shock. But I'm gonna give a speech about the history of International Women's Day. And I promise I won't make it boring, because history can be boring, so it's gonna be really exciting, I promise. So I want to go over the history of International Working Women's Day, not just to say, wow, a cool story back in the day, but I want to go over it so that it will give us hope and teach us the tools that we must take up if we want to live in a world free of exploitation and oppression. And the tools that I realized I needed after I learned about the true history of International Women's Day, not the capitalists pat the women on the back at work day, is solidarity and an understanding that if we fight for the most oppressed and show up ready to take on oppression in every setting that we're ever in, we will all see liberation. Because under the system we're currently in, working class people are fighting just to merely survive. Clara Limlik, a Ukrainian-born 19-year-old activist who was a leader in the strike that inspired the creation of International Women's Day, she said, quote, "They used to say you couldn't even organize women. They used to come to union, they wouldn't even come to union meetings. They were temporary workers. Well, we showed them," end quote. This quote reminds me of the reason for my existence, which is to organize and win, of the constant resistance of women, trans people, and gender nonconforming people. And I'm so pumped to share with you how women, specifically women workers of color, keep fighting today, as we can see by this little bit. German socialist Clara Zetkin, she first called the International Women's Day to be an official celebrated day in 1910 at the Second International Conference of Working Women. This call was inspired by marches and strikes led by women garment workers in New York City in 1908 and 1909. About 15,000 marched in New York City for shorter work days, better pay, the end of child labor, and voting rights. They marched with the vision that their struggle was about everyday material economic demands to feed their families. Later that year, women textile workers organized a 13-week general strike for better pay and working conditions, and it was named the Rising of the 20,000. And it was a strike led by young immigrant women. One of the leaders who I mentioned, Clara, she was 19-year-old, a veteran activist, and she had already been arrested 17 times. Goals. At the end of the strike, which the rank and file workers voted on unanimously, workers won shorter work weeks and 4 holidays with pay. They did this because they worked together and they organized, right? The first official International Women's Day was in 1911, and ceremonies and marches took place all over the world. These ceremonies were described as the first show of militancy by working women. Men stayed home with the kids and women went to the organizing meetings, put them in their place. Just the planning of International Working Women's Day literally shook the organization of the nuclear family. International Women's Day also sparked the revolution in Russia in 1917. And this is my favorite story. In 1935, 1,000 black women in Harlem marched and demanded a 25% reduction in meat prices. Groups of women went into white grocery stores and demanded that they stop selling high-priced, low-quality food. Later that evening, so same day they got a win, almost 50 stores agreed to drop their prices by 25%. The Communist Party newspaper, they called it the Revolt of the Housewives, and they celebrated such an amazing victory. So this day, right, still lives on today through radical events like this that we're at, and millions of women going on strike all over the world. Just a couple days ago, 350,000 people went on strike in Madrid, and thousands of people striked and flooded the streets in Mexico City. So I want to flip it a little bit. History is important, but that doesn't mean that it's static, right? It's dialectical. We can change it, right? And I want to share why it is paramount to fight for trans liberation while we take up the need to fight for women's liberation. Because the oppressed must be trained to respond to all cases of tyranny, oppression, violence, and abuse. There will be no liberation for some while trans and gender nonconforming people are still fighting for their right to exist. And as we celebrate today, we must redefine what womanhood is and disconnect it from uteruses and just vulvas, right? Because being a woman is what we want it to mean. We can define that for ourselves. Because trans liberation is akin to the fight for self-determination, the fight for reproductive rights, for abortion, the fight for no borders and no walls, and the fight to free Palestine. When trans people, we are fighting for women's liberation. And I think that we are seeing change, which is so amazing. Surveys are coming out that more queer and trans youth are coming out at an earlier age. And Laverne Cox was on Times Magazine, right? But at the same time, we are seeing the tightening of borders, heightened police violence, the growth of the far right, the deterioration of public housing and public schools. And it is still very much a dangerous country to be trans. So where do we go from here? So how do we get to a world where women, queer, and trans folks don't have to do all the free labor at home and then be terrified of walking down the street alone? We must remember that there is no trickle-down liberation. We must center women, queer and trans people, black and brown people, indigenous folks, undocumented people, disabled people, and we must organize. Because it is only in struggle that people build consciousness and realize that they aren't free while anybody else is oppressed. And I don't want fucking allyship. I want solidarity. Fighting racism and sexism isn't simply a matter of doing the right thing, which is really important, but also seeing your own liberation as so importantly linked to the liberation and oppressed of everybody else. When your coworkers can be abused at work because they are immigrants or they are women, it increases the chances that you can be abused as well. When we take up these struggles, their potential as a united collective force fighting for better conditions for all is stronger. And when we don't, we are weakened, sometimes fatally. So I want to end with a poem that I cry at every time I read, so wish me luck. Okay, this is by Assata Shakur. If you haven't read this book, you should. Changed my life. Okay, so she says, I have been locked by the lawless, handcuffed by the haters, gagged by the greedy. And if I know anything at all, it's just that a wall is just a wall and nothing more at all. It can be broken down. I believe in living. I believe in birth. I believe in the sweat of love and fire of truth. And I believe that a lost ship steered by tired, seasick sailors can still be grounded home to port. So thank you.
I'm here to share a poem with you all written by Darine Tartour, a 36-year-old Palestinian poet, leader, and activist from El Leina, who was convicted in May of 2018 and sentenced to 5 months in prison for inciting terrorism by sharing this poem on her social media. Tartour was then placed under house arrest for 3 years with no access to the internet or anything. So as of 1967, or the Six-Day War, 10,000 Palestinian women have been arrested by the Israeli state. More than half reported being subjected to psychological torture and ill treatment, such as beatings, verbal abuse, strip searches, sexual harassment, and violence. So this is dedicated to all political prisoners out there and all the women who are targeted and accused of anti-Semitism because of their unapologetic support for Palestine, from Angela Davis to Ilhan Omar. Thank you. Resist my people, resist them. In Jerusalem, I dressed my wounds and breathed my sorrows, and carried the soul in my palm for an Arab Palestine. I will not succumb to the peaceful solution, never lower my flags until I evict them from my land. I cast them aside for a coming time. Resist my people, resist them. Resist the settlers' robbery and follow the caravan of martyrs. Shred the disgraceful constitution which imposed degradation and humiliation and deterred us from restoring justice. They burned blameless children. As for Hadid, they sniped her in public, killed her in broad daylight. Resist my people, resist them. Resist the colonialist's onslaught, pay no mind to his agents among us, who chain us with the peaceful illusion, do not fear doubtful tongues. The truth in your heart is stronger as long as you resist in a land that has lived through raids and victory. So Ali called from his grave, resist my rebellious people. Write me as a prose on the agarwood. My remains have you as a response. Resist my people, resist them. Resist my people, resist them. Thank you.
got the blues. I got the blues. Well, there's blues everywhere. Superman left the time. Well, there's blues on my shelf. And well, there's blues in my milk bag. Blues all up on my shelf. Well, there's blues everywhere. 'Cause I'm sleeping by myself. I'm looking for a room or to follow. I'm hoping for some sunshine today. Hoping that now might be fine. 'Cause I know how to lose, but you gotta win sometimes. I used to believe in something. I used to believe in me. Not sure how I lost my way. Can't tell anymore if I'm naked or I walked a long way in the wrong direction, just to turn around and find out I'm still me. I thought I knew my soul, thought I knew my hunger. Perceptions I swallow are devouring me. Cause you have to lose, but sometimes you win. I'm looking for sunshine on my back porch. I'm looking for a spot gonna burn down this torch. I'm thinking it's time for me to try again. 'Cause you have to lose, but sometimes you win. Okay, that was it. Thanks, you guys. There was one more verse of the song. Yeah, it's okay though. It's okay. It's okay. All right. Let's sing the last verse. I know this is ending somewhere. I think the time's finally right. Gonna write our own stories, 'cause we are the dark, but we're also the light. Alright, that's it. Thank you.
I'm hoping that we can bring our full selves into this space, pour all our needs into these poems, fit every dream our community has ever held on to, because we are not silent. We are South Tucson.
My fellow BIPOC, we entered a room as a dozen women. We didn't think anybody would show up or want to be a part of this. So I'm taking like a couple minutes, Najima, to just thank everybody. I didn't realize how bad Tucson needed this, how bad I needed it, so thank you.
Hey, how's everyone doing? International Women's Day. How are you doing? No, this stage was lit. I almost wanted that poetry to be kept on here just so I could be like stepping, just have this platform of just such beautiful, great words. But you feel the energy already, the vibrations of the dance, the vibrations of that spoken word, of that energy. So just having that here and being here with all of you today, all the vendors, all the folks, like This is the piece of Tucson that has driven me back home. This is that part that I've really come to nestle within my veins and called and have the 520 proud to be my hometown, my community. And I guess I can just share a little bit what's really driving my passion forward in the work that I'm doing. I'm really doing a lot more collective liberation in the sense that we really have to make sure that our actions are inherently always tied to our values. When we lose sight of those values, then that is when our work is going to lose the emphasis that we are going to keep replicating the systems of oppression that have been here since we have been colonized. Whatever that looks like, if that means that our land and our culture was stripped from us, if that means that we were stripped from our land and brought to a foreign land, whatever that looks like to us, we, though, are the resiliency of our ancestors who refused to give up. And so this is why this space created by BIPOC United Tucson needed to exist, because we needed to come with these messages unapologetically. We cannot filter those messages. We cannot water them down. We cannot edit them. We're not going to give you no diet messages of this stuff, because that is ultimately that's where the work fails, when we start to edit these messages. And that also includes our movement spaces. I left Tucson, Arizona in 2011 because I was sexually assaulted, which took place in a movement space. I was ever since I was in high school, I was really involved with the immigrant rights movement, also the movement for ethnic studies. I took the ethnic studies classes when I was at Tucson High, and I didn't know at the time that those classes would be banned. Last year, 2018, it was the 10-year anniversary, not only of the first anti-ethnic studies legislation that was introduced to the city of Tucson, SB 1108, where we would see two after that, and the third would be signed into law, HB 2281. But that was also the 10-year anniversary when two filmmakers entered into our community with the project to document and film the student and youth-led movement of ethnic studies. On the opening night, I was sexually assaulted by the director. And there was attempts to have community accountability processes, but ultimately those fell through. There was talks that were, messages, like agreements that were made, weren't followed through with, and ultimately what the response was that I was just cut out of this film so that it could continue to be used as a fundraising measure across the country and to spread this message of the ethnic studies movement, something I was no longer a part of any longer. And not only just so much like does that, again, that's like a personal, sorry I didn't even say trigger warning, but we have to be able to name these issues. We have to name these experiences of violence in order for us to dismantle them and to understand what we are dealing with, especially within our own spaces where we are fighting for liberation and we are fighting to dismantle white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, and capitalism, and have to inherently see how that violence is rooted in this legacy of colonization. Let alone the just the silencing of it. I didn't have the language at the time, but be able to name that that's rape culture. The act of silence, the act of dismissal, the act of victim blaming, victim shaming, the act of counter-organizing, just so that we can choose to throw people away. We can choose to dismantle and really just discredit people over to the point where they are going to be turned into collateral damage because we need a movie. We need R. Kelly's R&B singles. We need Michael Jackson's pop hits because we refuse to look at the violence that people are perpetuating against children, against young people, against black women. And no, we need to say that that is not our culture and we should not be accepting that. That is violence that is not from our kind, and we need to be able to look at that head on, straightforward, and be able to see that we need to dream something better where we no longer make excuses for this type of violence, because our movements are growing weaker every day when we lose people to that violence. I left Tucson for 7 years because of that violence. And through along that way, I have met so many people along their pathways who reached out to me and said, Leilani, I heard what happened to you. The same thing happened to me. I left to New York. I left to Houston. I left here. I left there. Throughout the years, that is just the same repetition over and over and over again. And that is literally our movement spaces losing amazing organizers, strategists. We are losing revolutionary minds and hearts and souls because we refuse to hold perpetrators accountable, and we refuse to uplift our culture where we no longer feel that violence is acceptable. We have to dismantle it. And the work that I'm working right now, Sustainable Nations, we're developing a program called Roots to Sky Decolonial Healing Justice Program. Our table's over there.
We're having monthly sessions for BIPOC folks, Black, Indigenous people of color, where we can come together and truly look at just different ways. I mean, we live in a violent society. Let's face it. I can turn on the TV right when I get home, and you're going to see so much disturbing messages that really are inherently rooted in white supremacy, capitalism, heteropatriarchy. So how do we navigate through the system and still, again, really reclaim traditional models of healing, traditional models of justice, traditional models of accountability? And with these Roots to Sky sessions, that's really what we're trying to create in our own space, because we have to look for something outside the criminal justice system, which tells us that we just have to throw our people away in prison, where we have to throw them in prison systems where people are profiting off of this and never getting to the root source of that violence. Our people never threw folks away, but we never, at the same time, we never brushed things under the rug. We would nip things in the bud so that we made sure that this doesn't replicate into unhealthy patterns for our families, for ourselves, for our communities. And this is our right as survivors of colonization to reclaim those forms where we can say that we are going to protect one another. We're going to protect you and you and you and our families, and we're going to make sure that the next generation on, that they never have to figure out how to constantly heal and build at the same time. We are dismantling forms of oppression from the state when we're replicating that in our own circles. That is what we're trying to build. Everywhere we walk on this hemisphere, you're on indigenous land, and the first impact, the first instance of sexual violence was as a tool of conquest. So anywhere you go, you are in the presence of communities that have had to be resilient from day one and had to go back to forms of healing and just ways that we can continue on this form. And again, what do those traditional forms of justice and accountability look like? We have to recreate that almost in a new sense, but reclaim lost ways that are not lost, but we have to do a lot of deep soul searching and digging just to be able to really truly live those values, because we could be preaching values, we could be speaking values, but that does not amount to anything if our actions are not going to reflect that. Writing, though, was a way that I was really able to name what had happened and then also rebuild just my sense of dignity and my sense of pride. It took a long time. Some days like these, what I will be sharing with you often are words that I would write in journals when my hand was shaking, and now I got to the point where I can speak them out loud. So this is Fierce Stems with the Audacity to Heal. We are hidden jewels of the night, those who use shadows and shawls as shields as we steal everything back which was once stolen from us. Hell-bent against this society, claiming everything of ours as theirs. Our bodies, our essence, our hearts, words and desires. No! A mouth too tight from strain finally breaks open in darkness. Never again. Not our laughter, not our shine, not the songs and dance within our eyes. You can't have it. It's not for sale, so don't even ask. Rather, we share this magic with each other. Underneath pearl moonlit orb, casting light glow upon desert earth. The very smell of our skin coated in night and fire, victory and redemption, erotic and unashamed. We are love and roses to their hate and fear, their disdain for all things wild and alive. We are without borders, labels, or walls. We are flight when wings have been clipped. We are the dreams of our ancestors manifested in the flesh. The food and blossoms of their gardens grown in full bloom from seeds having been guarded carefully for generations and lifetimes back. We were fought for, their prizes of perseverance and refusal to give up. As these words traveled down star strings from the cosmos to my mind, a black cat had casually strolled across my path, and I could only smile and wave back at them. Under the light of the hazy moon and late night hour, the witching hour, the time we strike best. All fierce femmes are friends with animals that slink around in the dark, using shadows as our shawls and shields, wearing night as our crown. We come from that same feminine strength of deep mystery, the secret intricacies of life continuing to sustain itself, rebirth itself again and again and again and again against all odds. We who travel alongside sister bats, seeking sweet nectar under moonlights, Mother Coyote who serves as a caution, Grandmother Owl bringing death within her wings. I am friends with all these feared nocturnal creatures. I am in solidarity with them, all those called bad luck and warnings, labeled curses and feared. The young mothers, the girl who grew up fighting, the bad survivors, the sex workers. I am with them. The femmes battling addiction and vices, the ones whose spirits do not feel at home in their body, the exploited ones, the locked up ones, the ones without homes, all of those cast to the side, labeled slut, bitch, illegal, unfixable, unredeemable, replaceable, and not worth fighting for. I am with you, and I will always fight for you. I am with all the beautiful creatures of night, surviving in shadows to hunt, to provide for their family, to do whatever necessary to survive. This is a love ballad for all the labeled movement killers out there, the dividers, malinches, because you had an issue with how you were being mistreated and did not stay silent about it. I am with you, las perras, las putas. Somos protegidas por las mujeres de las cósmicas, las mujeres de los cielos, mujeres de miel y la tierra sagrada. We are protected, and that is why we are feared. For men of power fear what they cannot see in the dark, nor understand. They don't like those who slink around in the shadows, using darkness as our platforms to steal back all that was once stolen from us. They don't like as we enter and make our way into their light, because we claim both the night and the day as our God-given thrones. Out of line, you cry. Bitch, you mutter. Bruja, you say. All of the above. Of course I'm a bruja. I create, I heal, I survive, all at the same damn time. I do shit that could only be possible by magic. When I orgasm, I create organisms and universes into existence. I hold in my folds very life force itself. In my being, I have the potential to create planets, moons, and stars. Your very sun. I ceremony for life. I fight for life. I will die for life. And that is a very beautiful way to live, for I am femme. Fierce femmes make our survival a masterpiece of both beauty and art. We are constantly healing our hearts as well as our spirits, minds, bodies, and souls from those who would have tried to desecrate us. And I say try because they will never do such a thing. We are spiritual healers and guides from the very stars. We have learned that in order to heal the spirit, we must manifest beauty in every single thing we do. At times, that looks like allowing life to lead us upon untamed winds to reach destinations of horizons once left untouched. We recognize that healing is in those unplanned moments of challenge and growth. I rode that wind down south, that wild wind where life took me. I grasped on tightly, dearly, with urgency, as if my very survival depended on it, because in reality it did. I left the desert and I healed under waterfalls. I healed under stars shone across Milky Way galaxies. My spirit healed in warm Caribbean waters and cool sea breezes of the Pacific and the Sound. I healed myself by running through jungle breezes, chasing butterflies and waterfalls. No, I did not heed the warning of T-Boz Chili and Lisa Left Eye Lopez, but it ended up working out for me. Beauty was never foreign to me, and I relied upon it to show me the way. The mountains where my people came from out of spring, Tsikamo Ping, once spoke to me. Even if the people do not accept you, the land will always accept you if you always show love and respect. I did, and that is what I received in return. I healed in the beauty of giving and receiving of my body and love wholeheartedly. My soul awakened during the passionate explosion of two spirits coming together, or maybe three. Laughter, music, and heartbeats quickened when in love. That was the formula life showed for all things beautiful, and which ultimately remained and became and continues to be my chosen pathway for healing, to walk in beauty. I walk in beauty in front of me. I walk in beauty behind me. I walk in beauty below me. I walk in beauty above me. I walk in beauty all around me. Nejoniko. I walk in beauty. I am healing and surviving in beauty. Thank you.
beautiful, who wasn't beautiful, will never die. With the raging for achievement set, and all that glitters is equal when the sun explodes. Glitters is not gold. All that glitters is not gold. All that glitters is not gold. All that glitters is not gold. And why should I country? It's not anything. 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 Oh, baby!
Why don't you talk to me?
Oh, baby!
You just want me up
Oh, baby!
Why won't you answer me?
Oh, baby!
You don't say anything!
Oh, baby!
Why don't you talk to me?
Oh, baby!
You just want
need